So now you've learned how to use arrays and dictionaries. I've also showed you how you can use an index to get a specific item from an array. I've also showed you how you can use a key with a dictionary to get the associated value for that key. Now, wouldn't it be nice if you knew how to get all of the items in your array or dictionary? Well, to do that, we have to use loops, and that's what I'm going to show you how to do in this lesson. So here I've got a brand new playground. I've declared a new array and a dictionary because I'm going to be showing you how to loop through the different elements of the array and dictionary. So inside the array, I have a list of toys. In the dictionary, I have 3 key value pairs, and the key is a pet name and the value is the animal. So let's first start by looping through every item in the array. So there's a type of loop called the for in loop, and the syntax looks like this. You use the keyword for and you specify some sort of variable. Now I'm going to call my variable toy, and then the keyword in, and then the actual collection that you want to loop through. So in our case, that would be the array, right? A. And then you open up a pair of curly brackets, and what this is going to do is it's going to execute the code inside these brackets for every single item in A. As for this variable here, the element that it's currently working on or running that code for is going to be stored inside this variable. So for example, I'm going to print the variable toy. So what's going to happen here is it's going to first run this on the first element of the array, which is ball. It's going to put ball inside this variable toy, so I can simply print it. And then once it executes the code in here, it's going to loop, go back to the beginning, but now it's going to run it for the second element, and that's doll. And it's going to put it inside toy. And again, I'm just going to print it out, and then it's going to do this for every single item in the array. So if I run this 3-line code here, you're going to get each element printed out, because remember, it's printing it out here, right? You can also use this for in loop with a dictionary. It looks very similar, only slightly different on this part, because with an array, you have a single element, so we can put it into the variable like this. But with the dictionary, it's going to loop through each pair, and a pair contains a key and a value. So we're going to have to use a different type of variable called a tuple, which I'll show you how to do right now. So for, and then all you do is specify a pair of parentheses. Inside this tuple, you're going to have essentially 2 different variables. So here I can say this would be like the pet name, and then comma, and then that would be the actual pet type, right? So that right there is my tuple. So for every single iteration of that loop, it's going to put the key in this variable, and it's going to put the value inside this one right here. So I'm going to use the keyword in, and then I'm going to put the thing that I want to loop through, which is the dictionary. All right, so now let's have my curly brackets, and here I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to print, this one might be a little more descriptive. So I want to say basically pet name is a pet type. But as you learned before, in order to actually insert variables into a string, you have to do this. You have to do backslash, rounded bracket, and in the middle, in between your rounded brackets or parentheses, is the variable name. So I'm going to do the same thing here. And that's going to substitute inside this string the variables. All right, so let's print that out. Let me just actually comment this out so it doesn't get in the way. Let's print this out. All right, so Shell is a turtle, Stu is a dog, Snowball is a cat. As you can see, this is a perfect example of ordering versus not ordering. You'll notice that as it loops through, there's no guaranteed order, right? It's not going in the order that I specified. So it goes back to what we talked about in the previous lesson, being that arrays, you can guarantee the order. So this is how you loop through your array or dictionary. And if you wanted to perform some sort of task on each element, this is how you would do it. Now I want to show you another way of using the for in loop, because it's not only used for looping through collections like I've shown you here. You can also use the for in loop just to execute a piece of code a number of times. So let's say I wanted to print hello 10 times. So you start with the for keyword and then some sort of variable like we've had before there. I'm going to just call this variable index. And then again, you have the in keyword. And this time you specify a range. So I'm going to specify 1 to 10, 1 dot 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 10, and curly brackets again. And this time inside, I'm going to print hello. And it's basically going to loop from 1 to 10. And this is inclusive. So it's actually going to loop 10 times here. And I'm going to run, and you're going to get hello 10 times. All right, so what is this variable for? We're not really using it inside here, right? Well, the count for each loop is going to be put into the variable. So in the first time it runs this code, it's going to put 1 inside your index. Second time it's going to put 2, and so on and so forth. So in order to demonstrate that for you, let me just also print out the index as a variable. Oops, sorry. There we go. And let me just comment this print statement out, and let's run this code. So as you can see, I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, you notice that before it was highlighting this line talking about this variable, and Xcode is basically saying if you're not going to use that variable inside the block, so let's remove it right there, and let's see if we get that error back. Yeah, so it's basically saying it was never used. Consider, let me expand this window so you can see, consider replacing it with an underscore or removing it. So you actually could just replace it with an underscore like that, and it just looks a little cleaner. It's not information for the programmer that doesn't need to be there, so your brain doesn't have to process as much. So if you run that, that works perfectly well as well. So right here it's saying the same thing because we got rid of these print statements, but if we still had them, then it would get rid of these errors here, or warnings rather. Now one last thing about the for in loop. There is another way to go through arrays. Sometimes you might not want to do it this way that I've shown you up here because you need the index of the item as well. So in that case, you can use a range like this to go through the array. So you would specify for, let's say, index in 0. Remember, the reason why I'm starting at 0 is because arrays are 0 based. So element 1 actually is in index 0. This is index 1, this is index 2, and this is index 3. Right? So even though you have 4 elements, the last element is at index 3. So I would actually go dot 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 3, right? And then I would go print a, and then I would pass in the index, right? So I would get ball, doll, drums, and car. So now I actually also have the index, so I can do something like this. So this actually needs to be a substituted variable in here, is at index, and then I can substitute index in there. So if I run this code, then I get a sentence like this. Ball is at index 0, doll is at index 1, and so on and so forth. But there are some improvements we could do to this because you might not always know how many elements are in an array. So instead of specifying 3 here, we can use the count property of the array. So 0 to a.count, but we have to minus 1 because count is going to return 4, right? But the index only goes up to 3. So we actually need to do 4 minus 1, like that. So if we run that code, it's gonna still run. If you forget to minus 1, it's gonna try to run from 0 to 4, and when it gets to 4, it's going to crash because there is no element at index 4. So you get the index out of range. So you've learned all about using the for in loop, but there are 2 other types of loops that I'd like to show you how to use because there may be different scenarios that arise where they are more suitable. So let's take, for example, this challenge right here. First of all, I've got an empty array that stores integers. There's nothing in it right now. And the challenge is to add 10 numbers into this array. Duplicates are okay. So this would be perfect to use a for in loop again, just like you've learned before, where we loop 10 times, and each of those iterations, we are going to just generate a random number from 1 to 10, and then let's just put it into that array. So here's how that would look. For, I'm going to use underscore because I don't really need the counter. In, and then I'm going to do 1 to 10, so that's going to loop 10 times. And each time I am just going to generate a random number. Let's use let random number equals int dot random, and I'm going to randomize a number between 1 to 10. And then I'm just going to append it into that array. And just like that, I've added 10 random numbers into that array because it's going to loop 10 times. And just to demonstrate that, I am going to print out the number right after I add it into the array. So we can see that it's added 10. And you could see some duplicates there as well. Now the next challenge is an extension of this where we want to add 10 numbers into the array, but no duplicates are allowed. So first of all, let's clear out all the numbers from that array. I'm going to say remove all. And the difficulty with completing this challenge using the for in loop is that it's hard to predict how many iterations you're going to need until you get 10 unique numbers into this array, especially when the range is just from 1 to 10, right? Actually, there's no telling how many iterations it's going to take. It could be as low as 10, where you get perfectly unique numbers each of the 10 iterations, or it could be 100 or 1,000, you never know. So the for in loop isn't really suited for this sort of challenge. There's another type of loop called the repeat while loop, and it will basically continue to run infinitely until a certain condition is met. So let's take a look at how the repeat while loop looks. So first of all, you use the keyword repeat, and then you write a piece of code here, and then at the bottom you specify while, and then you specify some sort of condition that determines whether or not it should repeat another loop. So in here, we could have the same code. Let me just make some space here. We could have the same code, let random number equals int dot random, and we will again randomize a number from 1 to 10. But before we put it into the array this time, we want to check if that number already exists. Let me see. Oh, I'm missing a parameter there. All right, so like I said, before we add this number into the array, we want to check if it already exists. And because we're working with collection type classes like the array, it has a lot of handy methods for us to work with the data set. One of those handy methods that we are going to use right now is called contains. So this method, given an element, it will tell you whether or not that array contains that element. If it does, it's going to return true. If it doesn't, it's going to return false. So we can say if contains random number equals false, right? Then we are going to append that random number. Another interesting way to write this is just if it's not equal to true. All right, and there is even a shorter way that you could write this, because you want it to come down here when it actually is false, right? So you could just actually do it like that, because you know that this is going to return false, right, if it doesn't exist, and this exclamation mark is just going to flip that false to true, and so it will go in there. So that's a bit more advanced, but we could leave it like this, just so it's easier to understand. Okay, so we are adding the number. Let's just print it out as well. We are adding this number if that number doesn't exist in the array. And what's the condition for repeating? Well, if we don't have 10 numbers, then we're going to repeat, right? So we're going to say while c.count is less than 10. And if I run this code now, let me just comment out this print statement so we don't get that in the console, and I'm going to run this. And you can see here it's printed actually a lot of times. It's had to run all of these times in order to get 10 numbers into that array. And this is going to differ each time we run it because it's random, right? So the repeat while loop is helpful when you don't know how many times you're going to need to loop something. Now there's another close cousin of the repeat while loop called the while loop. And this is actually the simpler form of the repeat while loop. And the only difference is that instead of checking the condition at the bottom, it checks the condition at the top before it even executes the code once. Let me show you how that looks. So if we were to write this same code, but using a while loop instead, I would say while c.count is less than 10, and that's it. See, then I would put this in here, and we could do the same thing. So both types of loops accomplish the same thing. They both loop for an infinite amount of times until some condition is false. However, the while loop checks the condition first. If that condition is false, it's not even going to run this code in the first place. However, with the repeat while loop, it's going to run this code first at least once, right? Before it checks the condition if it should loop again. So that's the slight difference between the repeat while loop and the while loop. Alright, today you guys learned about loops. You learned about the for in loop, which is going to repeat a certain number of times, and you can use that to go through all of the items inside your array or dictionary. Or you learned about the while loop that is going to loop until a certain condition is met. And you also learned about the repeat while loop, which is going to execute the code once before checking the condition to see if it should repeat. Now, I highly recommend that you download the worksheet and get in some extra practice with loops because they're very common in all iOS apps. And I'll also link to the documentation page below if you want to check out more details about loops. All right, great progress. I'll see you in the next lesson.